Have you ever looked at a map and felt a strange sense of certainty that every mountain, every river, every valley is exactly where it's supposed to be? What if I told you that some of those places, once clearly marked and widely known, are no longer there, not just forgotten, but vanished, erased from the landscape and scrubbed from the records as if they never existed at all? Across continents and centuries, hidden valleys have disappeared from maps, leaving behind only whispers, legends, and a haunting question: where did they go, and why were they forgotten? It's a mystery that speaks to something deep within us: the thrill of the unknown, the romance of lost worlds, and the humbling realization that our understanding of this planet is built on fragments. These weren't just empty patches of land. They were once vibrant, living places, fertile basins cradling communities, sheltered hollows hiding ancient secrets, oasis valleys sustaining travelers, and trade routes for generations. Some were lost to the relentless forces of nature, consumed by desert sands, buried under glacial ice, or shattered by earthquakes. Others may have been deliberately concealed, hidden away by inhabitants seeking solitude or safety, or struck from maps by powers that wanted them forgotten. And then there are those disappearances that defy easy explanation, tangled in tales of supernatural events, cartographic deception, or errors so profound they rewrote geography itself. In this video, we're setting out on a journey to uncover 20 of these lost valleys, from the high Himalayas to the deep Amazon, from the shifting sands of the Sahara to the misty glens of Scotland. We'll explore why valleys, in particular, capture our imagination so powerfully. Is it because they represent shelter and sustenance, seclusion and mystery? Or is it the eerie idea that an entire world can be swallowed by time, leaving no trace behind? Together, we'll examine historical records, sift through local folklore, and consider how modern technology is both solving these puzzles and deepening the intrigue. By the end, you'll see just how fragile our records really are, and how much wonder still waits, hidden in plain sight, just beyond the edges of the map. So settle in and prepare to question everything you thought you knew about the world's forgotten corners. But what is it about these lost places that grips us so tightly? Why does a vanished valley stir something deeper in the human spirit than a forgotten island or a sunken city? Perhaps it's because a valley is more than just geography. It is a vessel for life itself. Think about the very shape of a valley, cradled by mountains or hills, protected from the elements, often cradling a river that brings water and fertility. For millennia, valleys have been the cradles of civilization, offering shelter, resources, and a sense of security. They are natural homes, so when one disappears, it feels less like a change in the landscape and more like the loss of a potential sanctuary, a severed connection to a world that could have been. This taps into a primal fear, the fear of being lost, of home itself being erased from existence. This profound sense of loss fuels their starring role in our stories. From the very beginning, hidden valleys have been the backdrop for our deepest myths and aspirations. Consider Shangri-La, the fictional valley paradise from James Hilton's novel, representing an earthly utopia untouched by time and trouble. Or think of Brigadoon, the enchanted Scottish village that appears only once every 100 years. These stories didn't emerge from a vacuum. They are cultural echoes of a universal longing for a place of peace and purity, a refuge from the chaos of the world. Even in modern media, this archetype is powerful. The hidden valley of the Jedi in Star Wars, the secluded community in the village. These narratives prove that the concept of a lost or hidden valley continues to resonate, offering a powerful metaphor for secrecy, safety, and the search for a better world. And now, in our digital age, this ancient fascination has found a new playground. Online forums and video platforms are buzzing with theories about real-world vanished valleys, dissecting old maps and satellite images with the fervor of detectives. A blurry image on Google Earth can spark 1,000 theories, a testament to how technology has not demystified our world, but has instead given our curiosity new tools. This is the fascinating paradox of modern exploration. Advancements like satellite imagery and lidar, which uses lasers to map the ground even through dense forest canopy, have solved countless historical puzzles, revealing ancient cities and forgotten roads. Yet for every mystery they solve, they seem to deepen another. They remind us of the sheer scale of our planet and the limitations of past cartographers. A valley missed by a surveyor 200 years ago might now be visible from space, yet its history and reason for being forgotten remain locked away, waiting for someone to connect the dots. This beautiful tension between cold, hard data and warm, enduring legend is exactly what we'll be exploring. Our journey through these 20 vanished valleys isn't just a catalogue of places that are no longer there. It's an investigation into the very nature of discovery and memory. We will weigh satellite data against shepherds' tales, compare geological surveys with centuries-old poetry. Each story is a unique blend of measurable fact and unverifiable myth, and that is where the true magic lies. It challenges the notion that the world is fully known and mapped, inviting us to believe that just maybe, some of these storied valleys are still out there, hidden in a remote mountain range or concealed by a dense, uncharted rainforest, patiently waiting for their moment to be rediscovered. Our journey into the unknown begins in the most formidable mountain range on Earth, the Himalayas. Here, where the air thins and the peaks pierce the heavens, the story of our first vanished valley unfolds. It was known to a handful of adventurous souls in the 19th century as a place of almost mythical abundance, a high-altitude sanctuary cradled between jagged ridges, brimming with lush meadows, crystal-fed streams, and a unique ecosystem found nowhere else. Early explorers, perhaps British surveyors or hardy botanists drawn by rumors of undiscovered species, documented this fertile haven. Their travelogues, now fragile and fading in archival libraries, speak of vibrant flowers that carpeted the ground, of rare birds with plumage like jewels, and of a serene, almost sacred, silence that blanketed the entire basin. It was a world apart, an Eden hidden in the roof of the world, and then it was gone. Sometime after the 1800s, this valley simply ceased to appear on any official map. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed it whole. So what could have happened to such a significant and documented place? The theories are as dramatic as the landscape itself. Local lore, passed down through generations of Sherpa and Tibetan communities, offers two compelling narratives. One speaks of a catastrophic event, a monumental avalanche triggered by the angry gods of the mountain, sending millions of tons of rock and ice thundering down to seal the only passable entrance forever, entombing the valley in a frozen grave. The other theory is far more human and intentional. It suggests the people who called that valley home, perhaps seeking ultimate solitude or protection from outside influence, made a conscious choice to vanish. They could have destroyed the narrow trails leading in, fostering the legend of a curse to deter the curious, and chosen a life of complete isolation, effectively removing themselves and their home from the known world. Then there is the more mundane, yet equally fascinating possibility of simple human error. The Great Trigonometrical Survey of India, the massive British colonial project to map the subcontinent with scientific precision, was a Herculean effort. Yet, in such incredibly remote and treacherous terrain, mistakes were inevitable. a tired surveyor could have misread a theodolite. A cartographer might have misplotted a ridgeline from a distant vantage point, or a crucial page of notes could have been lost in a blizzard. The valley's location, if based on a single erroneous calculation, might have been recorded in a place where it never actually existed, creating a phantom on the map that later, more accurate surveys could never hope to find. This mystery has not gone unchallenged. In modern times, equipped with satellite imagery and GPS, several expeditions have set out to rediscover this lost world. They've followed the cryptic clues in those old journals, triangulating descriptions of glacial peaks and river sources. Some have returned with tantalizing but ambiguous evidence, a strange, lush patch visible on satellite photos that could be a high meadow, or a geological formation that loosely matches a century-old sketch. Others have found nothing but impassable cliffs and dead ends. No expedition has ever returned with definitive proof, leaving the valley's ultimate fate shrouded in the very mists that cling to the Himalayan slopes. It stands as a powerful testament to the immense forces at play in these high altitudes, forces of nature so powerful they can reshape the land in an instant, and forces of human will capable of creating a silence so complete it can erase a valley from history itself. From the dizzying heights of the Himalayas, we now descend into a landscape of a different kind of mystery, the rolling, green, and often eerily misty glens of Scotland. Here, shrouded not in ice but in legend and low-hanging cloud, lies the story of our second vanished valley, the enigmatic Vale of Shadows. Medieval chronicles, those meticulous records kept by monks and scribes, speak of this place with a mixture of awe and trepidation. They describe it as a lowland basin perpetually draped in a silvery mist, a place where the sunlight struggled to penetrate, giving it an eternal twilight ambience. These texts didn't just note its existence, they marveled at its contents: ancient, crumbling stone circles, the overgrown foundations of buildings whose architects were long forgotten, and a sense of profound age that hung heavier than the fog itself. It was a valley rich with the whispers of a past that predated kings and clans, and then, by the 1700s, it was no longer there. Cartographers, updating their maps with new surveys, simply could not find it. The Vale of Shadows had been scrubbed from the parchment, leaving behind only its haunting name. The reasons for its disappearance are as layered as the Scottish peat. On one hand, we have the slow, inexorable hand of nature. Scotland's landscape is a living, breathing entity. Over centuries, dense forests can reclaim open land, with birch and pine marching across meadows and burying ruins under a blanket of roots and leaves. Similarly, the relentless Scottish weather, wind and rain, can cause significant land erosion, subtly reshaping hillsides and silting up streams until a once distinct valley becomes an indistinguishable part of the surrounding moor. It's a quiet, geological magic trick performed over generations, making a place vanish not with a cataclysm, but with a sigh. But the human heart is seldom satisfied with such slow, scientific explanations, and so the folklore that grew around the Vale is far more thrilling. One persistent tale paints it as a sanctuary for outlaws, a natural fortress where rebels, fugitives, and those who defied the crown could disappear without a trace, protected by the treacherous terrain and the ever-present mist that swallowed sounds and sights. This theory suggests the valley's disappearance from maps was a deliberate act of cartographic censorship, a way for authorities to deny its existence and cut off its symbolic power as a haven for dissent. The other, more chilling strand of folklore speaks of something inherently wrong with the place itself. It was said to be a thin place, where the barrier between our world and another was tissue paper thin. Tales abound of travelers, lost shepherds, brave knights, foolish treasure hunters who ventured into the mist seeking shelter or glory and were never seen again. Their fate was the stuff of campfire stories. Were they spirited away by the fae, trapped in a time loop, or simply claimed by the treacherous bogs that often accompany such low-lying areas? These stories, while supernatural, often have a kernel of truth to them. A real danger, like quick mud or sudden fog, can easily be mythologized over centuries into a spectral warning. This blend of fact and fable is precisely what draws modern archaeologists to the mystery. They haven't found the valley itself, but they have unearthed tantalizing clues that suggest the old texts weren't pure fantasy. Scattered across a particular region of the Scottish Highlands, field surveys have turned up anomalous artifacts, a peculiarly carved stone that doesn't match any known local style, fragments of pottery that seem older than the established timeline of settlement in the area, and the occasional, perplexing arrangement of moss-covered rocks that hints at a larger, buried structure. These finds are like pieces from a dozen different puzzles, never quite forming a complete picture. They confirm that something was there, that people lived and built in that area long ago, but they stop frustratingly short of pointing to a single, definitive location for the legendary Vale. The story of the Vale of Shadows is a powerful lesson in the art of disappearance. It shows us that a place doesn't need to be remote or exotic to be lost. It can vanish in the very heart of a well-trodden and meticulously mapped nation, not through a dramatic event, but through the slow, patient reclamation of nature and the gradual fading of memory into myth. It reminds us that the landscape itself has a long memory, and that secrets don't always require a journey to the ends of the earth to find. Sometimes they are waiting just beneath our feet, hidden in the familiar. Now we travel from the misty highlands to a realm of sun and sand, to the greatest desert on earth. The Sahara is a place we often think of as an eternal, lifeless ocean of dunes, but its history is one of dramatic, breathtaking change. And it is here, buried under countless tons of shifting sand, that we find the story of our third lost valley, a vanished oasis that was once a beacon of life in an increasingly unforgiving world. Ancient trade routes, those vital arteries of commerce and culture that connected empires, clearly marked this location. For centuries, it was an essential waypoint, a lush, green valley where weary camel caravans could find respite. It offered shade, fresh water from hidden springs, and grazing for animals that had endured weeks of relentless sun. It wasn't just a stop on a map. It was a sanctuary, a hub of human activity where languages mixed, goods were traded, and stories were exchanged under the stars before travelers ventured back out into the immense, intimidating emptiness. The most vivid accounts of this place come from the meticulous records of Arab geographers and historians during the Islamic Golden Age. These scholars, who combined rigorous observation with a thirst for knowledge, described it not as a mere watering hole, but as a small, thriving community. Their texts speak of date palms heavy with fruit, gardens cultivated in the rich soil, and even a permanent settlement with modest buildings constructed from sun-baked clay. It was an outpost of civilization, a defiant splash of green in a landscape that was already beginning to turn against it. These weren't romantic fictions. They were clinical, geographical reports that treated the Oasis Valley as a known, quantifiable fact. And then, over the course of several centuries, the descriptions grew fewer, the details more vague, until all mentions of it ceased entirely. The valley had been scrubbed from the maps, not by an eraser, but by the desert itself. The force that erased it was desertification, a slow-motion environmental catastrophe that unfolded over hundreds of years. The Sahara has not always been the hyper-arid expanse we know today. It has cycled through wet and dry periods for millennia, influenced by subtle shifts in the Earth's orbit and axis. The era when this oasis flourished was likely the tail end of a greener phase. As the climate changed, rainfall patterns shifted. The rains became less frequent and more unreliable. The hidden aquifers that fed the valley's springs would have slowly drained, not to be replenished. Without its lifeblood of water, the vegetation would have withered. The once fertile soil, no longer held in place by roots, turned to dust, and then the desert winds, the relentless harmattan, began their work. Grain by grain, dune by dune, the sands advanced, swallowing the gardens, burying the buildings, and finally sealing the valley under a sterile, golden blanket. It was a quiet, total, and terrifyingly complete burial. For a long time, this story resided firmly in the realm of legend, a cautionary tale about the power of nature. But modern technology has thrown a fascinating and controversial new light on the mystery. Satellite radar and infrared scanning techniques, which can peer beneath the top layers of sand, have recently identified tantalizing anomalies in a region that matches the general location of the old trade routes. These scans have revealed what appear to be subsurface structures, linear features that look like buried walls, and circular patterns that could be the outlines of ancient wells or storage pits. The discovery has ignited a fierce debate among archaeologists and historians. One camp argues this is the definitive proof, the ghostly footprint of the lost Oasis Valley, finally revealing itself after a millennium of silence. The other camp is far more cautious, pointing out that geological formations can often mimic human-made structures, especially when viewed from hundreds of miles in space. They suggest these readings might be a cruel mirage of technology, a palimpsest of stone and wishful thinking. This incredible story forces us to confront the incredibly thin line that separates history from myth, especially in such an extreme environment. A place that was absolutely real, documented by sober scholars and relied upon by countless merchants, can, within a few generations, become indistinguishable from a fairy tale. Its disappearance is a profound lesson in fragility. It shows us that the environments we depend on are not permanent fixtures. Change on a scale that can erase entire valleys from the map is a constant of our planet's history. The lost oasis of the Sahara stands as a silent monument to the power of a changing climate, a haunting reminder that even the most vital sanctuaries can be reclaimed by the desert, leaving behind nothing but whispers on the wind and a mystery buried deep beneath the sand. Leaving the vast, sun-scorched sands of the Sahara behind, we now ascend into the breathtaking, cloud-piercing peaks of the Andes Mountains. This is a landscape shaped by colossal geological forces, a place where the very earth feels alive and unpredictable. And it is here, amidst these soaring ridges and deep ravines, that we encounter a disappearance of an entirely different nature, one born not from slow environmental change, but from a powerful collision of human will and the raw power of the planet. Our fourth valley, a hidden glen of legendary fertility, was first documented by the most unlikely of chroniclers, the Spanish conquistadors. These armored invaders, driven by a thirst for gold and glory, marched through the Andes in the 16th century, and their surviving reports occasionally mention a startling discovery, a secluded valley, hidden from the main Incan roads, possessing soil so rich it seemed almost magical and home to small, fiercely independent communities that viewed the newcomers with deep suspicion and outright hostility. These were not the organized, imperial subjects of the Inca Empire. These were people who had chosen a life of isolation high in the mountains, and they guarded their fertile home with a terrifying resolve. Then, within a generation or two, this described valley was gone. Later Spanish maps drawn by administrators trying to codify their new dominion showed no trace of it. It had simply been wiped from the colonial record. So what happened? The theories are as dramatic as the Andes themselves. The first points to the immense seismic power that defines the region. This is the Pacific Ring of Fire, where tectonic plates constantly grind against one another. A single massive earthquake could have triggered a catastrophic landslide, sealing the only passable entrance to the valley with millions of tons of rock and earth, effectively locking it away from the outside world forever. In one violent geologic moment, a thriving community could have been transformed into an inaccessible tomb, its existence erased from all but memory. But the second theory is far more compelling and speaks to a different kind of power altogether, the power of resistance. The oral histories preserved by Andean indigenous groups tell a fascinating and recurring story, not of a valley that was destroyed, but of one that moved. This isn't meant to be taken literally, of course. It is a profound metaphor for a deliberate and sophisticated act of concealment, faced with the relentless advance of a brutal colonizing force, a force that brought disease, demanded tribute, and sought to dismantle their culture. The inhabitants of this valley may have made a conscious, collective decision to vanish. They could have systematically dismantled their own trails and pathways, allowing the aggressive Andean vegetation to reclaim the land. They might have relocated their dwellings further into inaccessible side canyons, or camouflaged them so perfectly they became invisible from even a short distance away. They would have then enforced a strict silence, a cultural pact to never reveal their location to outsiders, using the intimidating geography of the Andes as their primary shield. In this narrative, the valley didn't disappear, it was hidden. Its removal from the map was not a tragedy, but a strategic victory. This idea transforms the valley from a mere geographical feature into a potent symbol. It becomes a metaphor for cultural resilience, a testament to the incredible lengths to which people will go to protect their way of life, their freedom, and their families from existential threats. It represents the ultimate adaptation. Rather than fighting a losing battle against a superior military force, they chose to use their intimate knowledge of their environment to simply opt out of the conflict entirely, to remove themselves from the conqueror's narrative and therefore from their maps. The mystery has naturally attracted its share of modern seekers. Throughout the 20th century, several expeditions, armed with the conquistadors' vague descriptions and a sense of adventure, ventured into the remote corners of the Peruvian and Bolivian Andes, hoping to find some evidence of this lost agrarian haven. They searched for telltale signs, unusually fertile soil in a high basin, the remains of ancient terracing, or distinctive pottery shards. Yet, without exception, these searches ended in failure. They found stunning landscapes and challenging terrain, but no definitive proof of the specific valley described centuries before. This repeated failure only deepens the enigma. It suggests that if the valley was concealed, its inhabitants succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Their legacy is not one of ruins to be excavated, but of a story of a people who chose to become ghosts in their own land, leaving behind a powerful legend of resistance that continues to resonate deeply in the Andean world today. Our journey now takes us eastward to the heart of the ancient world and the legendary Silk Road, a sprawling network of trade routes that connected empires and ferried not just goods, but ideas, cultures, and stories across continents. It is here, in the vast and historically rich expanse of Persia, that we find the haunting tale of our fifth vanished valley, a place known in crumbling manuscripts as a verdant paradise, a jewel strung along the caravan routes. Persian geographers and poets wrote of it with palpable reverence, describing an emerald green vale where fruit trees grew heavy with unheard-of varieties, where the air was perfumed by exotic flowers, and where clear water channels, a marvel of ancient engineering, turned the soil into a breathtakingly productive garden. For weary merchants who had spent weeks crossing brutal salt deserts and barren mountain passes, this valley wasn't just a stop. It was a sensory shock, a confirmation of life's abundance, a near mythical respite that must have felt like a gift from heaven itself. And then, with terrifying swiftness, it was gone. Sometime after the cataclysmic events of the 13th century, this lush haven simply ceased to appear on any new maps or travel logs. It was erased as if it had never been. The prime suspect for this erasure is one of history's most destructive forces, the Mongol invasions. Led by Genghis Khan and his successors, the Mongol hordes swept across Asia with a policy of total war, designed not just to conquer, but to terrorize populations into submission. Cities that resisted were often razed to the ground, their populations massacred, and their intricate irrigation systems, the very lifelines of civilization in an arid land, deliberately and systematically destroyed. It is easy to imagine this fate befalling our lost valley. A Mongol army, perhaps pursuing a fleeing enemy or simply seeking to plunder its renowned wealth, could have descended upon it. The sophisticated network of khanats, those underground canals that tapped into distant aquifers to bring water to the surface, would have been an obvious military target. Destroy the water source and you destroy the community's ability to ever return. The valley's fertility, its very reason for existence, could have been extinguished in a matter of days, its soil quickly reverting to dust under the relentless Persian sun, its gardens withering into memory. But historians also posit another, slower, yet equally devastating possibility: ecological collapse from within. The very sophistication that made the valley a paradise might have contained the seeds of its own destruction. Maintaining those complex irrigation channels required a highly organized society, a deep pool of engineering knowledge, and constant, diligent maintenance. If the political order was shattered by conflict, or if a plague carried away the skilled engineers who understood the system, the delicate balance would have failed. A single neglected khanat could collapse, diverting the precious water flow. Silt could have clogged the channels. Without constant human intervention, the desert was always waiting to reclaim its own. This theory suggests the valley didn't vanish in a fiery apocalypse, but instead faded away in a tragic, slow-motion decline, its last inhabitants finally abandoning it to the sands when the water stopped flowing for good. What happened next is perhaps the most fascinating part of the story. The physical valley may have been lost, but it was immediately reborn in the realm of ideas. Persian poets and historians, mourning the loss of this beauty, began to romanticize it. It became the ultimate lost paradise, a Persian Eden. Their writings transformed it from a real, geographical location into a powerful symbol of a golden age, a place of perfect peace and abundance that existed just beyond the horizon of memory. This poetic resurrection actually inspired centuries of searchers. Adventurers and scholars, armed with these lush descriptions, went looking for this heaven on earth. What they found, however, was never definitive. They would occasionally stumble upon ambiguous ruins, a few crumbled walls of fired brick half buried in a dry wadi, or the ghostly outline of old field boundaries visible from a nearby ridge. But these fragments were never enough to reconstruct the whole. They were like finding a single beautiful piece of a mosaic, without any hope of ever seeing the full picture it came from. This has led to a fascinating and ongoing debate among modern historians. Some argue passionately that the Forgotten Vale was a single, specific location, a once real place that we simply haven't been able to pinpoint with archaeological certainty. Others propose a more complex and intriguing idea, that the valley described in the texts was never one place at all. Instead, it might be a composite, a literary amalgamation of the best features of several different oases and rest stops along that stretch of the Silk Road. In this view, the poets weren't describing a single valley, but the ideal of a valley taking the sweetest fruit from one place, the most ingenious water system from another, and the most stunning blossoms from a third, and weaving them all together into a perfect mythical whole. This theory illustrates a profound truth about how we understand the past. It shows us that historical narrative is not a perfect recording. It is often a blend of hard fact, collective memory, and symbolic storytelling. The story of the Forgotten Vale of Persia is about more than just a lost piece of land. It is a powerful lesson in how conflict can literally reshape geography, and how human memory, in its desperate longing for beauty and order, can transform a tragedy into a legend, ensuring that a place never truly dies, even when its location is lost to time. Our journey now pushes further north, into a realm of ice and legend, to the massive frozen island of Greenland. Today, we picture it as a stark, almost alien landscape of immense glaciers and barren rock, a place where life clings on with difficulty. But this was not always the case. To understand our sixth vanished valley, we must completely reset our mental image of this place. We have to travel back in time over 1,000 years to the era of the Vikings, when a very different Greenland greeted intrepid Norse settlers. Their maps and sagas, those epic poems of exploration and survival, tell a story that seems to contradict the land we see now. They speak of a specific, sheltered basin, a valley tucked away from the worst of the coastal winds that was not just habitable but genuinely hospitable. They called it a place for farming. Imagine that for a moment. In a land now defined by permafrost, these ancient texts describe pastures capable of supporting cattle, fields where hardy grains could be sown, and a community that thrived on agriculture. This wasn't a mere outpost, it was a green refuge, a vital breadbasket for the Norse eastern settlement, a place that anchored their belief that they could build a lasting life in this new world. And then it was gone. Sometime after the 1400s, this fertile basin vanished completely from all known records, swallowed by an advancing wall of ice. The culprit for this disappearance is one of the most significant climatic events in recent human history, the Little Ice Age. This wasn't an ice age in the grand geological sense, but a pronounced period of cooling that gripped the North Atlantic region for several centuries. Temperatures dropped, growing seasons shortened dramatically, and glaciers which had been in retreat during the warmer period the Norse initially enjoyed began to reawaken. They started to advance with a slow, inexorable power that is almost impossible to comprehend. Year after year, decade after decade, the ice would have crept forward. It wouldn't have been a sudden Hollywood-style event, but a creeping, terrifying inevitability. The farmers in that valley would have watched the glacier at the head of the basin get closer each year. They would have felt the summers grow colder and shorter, their crops failing with increasing frequency. The sagas themselves hint at this struggle, telling of winters that never seemed to end and of a creeping Fimbulwinter, a mythic era of endless cold. The ice didn't just make life difficult, it literally consumed the very land that made life possible. It scraped away the soil, buried the fields under hundreds of feet of compacted snow and ice, and ultimately sealed the entire valley under a frozen, impenetrable cap, erasing it from the landscape as thoroughly as if it had never existed. For centuries, this story resided in a hazy middle ground between verified history and romantic myth. Skeptics argued the Norse sagas were exaggerating, that the descriptions of green fields were the hopeful boasts of settlers trying to lure more people from Iceland and Norway. They saw the Lost Valley as a metaphor for a failed dream rather than a real, physical place. But the Earth, it seems, keeps its own records. In our current era of rapid global warming, Greenland's ice sheet is melting at an unprecedented rate. And as it retreats, it is beginning to give up its secrets. In areas along the fringes of the ice where the Norse settlements were once located, the receding glaciers are exposing ground that hasn't seen the sun in over 500 years. And what researchers are finding is nothing short of revolutionary. They are uncovering the ghostly outlines of ancient farmsteads, the stone foundations of longhouses and barns that are now emerging from beneath the melting ice. They are finding artifacts frozen in time, fragments of tools, pieces of leather clothing, and even preserved animal dung, all telling a story of a once thriving agricultural life in places that are today completely inhospitable. These aren't ambiguous clues, they are concrete, tangible proof that the sagas were not mere fiction. This incredible turn of events has completely revived the search for our specific lost valley. Glaciologists and archaeologists are now working together, using the old maps and sagas as a guide and modern satellite technology to monitor the ice melt. They are looking for the big one, the main agricultural basin that would have been the heart of the Norse colony's food production. Every summer, as more ice pulls back, the anticipation grows. Could the next melt season reveal the lost fields themselves? Will we find the frozen remains of a Norse plow, still stuck in the soil where its owner left it when the cold finally became too much? The story of this valley has been utterly transformed. It is no longer a debate about whether it was myth or reality. The reality has been proven. The new question is one of scale and location. The discovery of this valley would be the final, undeniable piece of evidence, a direct physical link to a world that was erased by climate change centuries ago. Its potential rediscovery offers a profound and deeply ironic lesson. The same force of climate change warming that is causing such global concern today is simultaneously acting as a key, unlocking a door to a past that was sealed away by a previous climate shift. It connects our present environmental anxieties directly to those of the past, showing us that the landscape beneath our feet is not permanent, but a dynamic, changing record of history, capable of both hiding and revealing the truth in the most dramatic ways imaginable. Leaving the frozen secrets of the Norse behind, we now journey to a land of dramatic contrasts, a place where steaming geothermal vents meet lush, impenetrable rainforests. Our search for vanished valleys brings us to the North Island of New Zealand, a landscape as rich in Maori legend as it is in breathtaking natural beauty. Here, the story of our seventh lost valley is not one of a place erased by ice or sand, but one perhaps intentionally veiled from the outside world, both in the ancient, rhythmic chants of the Maori, known as Waiata, and on the crude, early maps sketched by confused European explorers. There exists a persistent reference to a secluded hollow of incredible abundance. It was described as a place where the earth provided everything, forests teeming with flightless birds like the moa, rivers so thick with eels you could almost walk across them, and fertile soil that could grow giant, succulent tubers of kumara or sweet potato. For the Maori who navigated the vast Pacific to discover Aotearoa, this valley represented the ultimate prize, a cradle of life. Yet, despite these vivid descriptions, its precise location was never firmly fixed on any European map. It simply remained a tantalizing rumor, a X that marked a spot no outsider could ever find. The reasons for its disappearance from the geographical record are deeply woven into the very fabric of the land and its people. The North Island is part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, a volatile region where the Earth's crust is constantly at war with itself. This valley could have been a casualty of that violence. A massive volcanic eruption, like the devastating event that formed Lake Taupo centuries earlier, could have buried the entire basin under a deep layer of ash and pumice, instantly fossilizing it and altering the surrounding topography so completely that it became unrecognizable. The lush paradise would have been smothered in a catastrophic instant, its memory surviving only in the stories told around the fire. But there is another, far more compelling explanation that speaks to a profound cultural wisdom: tribal secrecy. In Maori tradition, certain places possess immense tapu, a sacred, restricted quality that sets them apart. A valley so rich in resources would have been incredibly precious, a lifeline for a hapu or sub-tribe during times of conflict or famine. To protect such a treasure, to maintain its tapu and ensure its survival, the knowledge of its location would have been a closely guarded secret, passed down only to trusted elders. When European settlers or Pakha began arriving with their unfamiliar customs, diseases, and insatiable appetite for land, the incentive to conceal this sanctuary would have become a matter of cultural survival. The valley's disappearance from record wasn't an accident. It was likely a deliberate, strategic act of preservation. The Maori, master navigators and intimately familiar with their environment, would have possessed the skills to effectively hide a place, not by building walls, but by controlling knowledge, by weaving protective stories of Taniwa guardian spirits to deter the uninvited, and by allowing the aggressive, fast-growing native bush to reclaim any faint trails. This creates a unique and ethically complex challenge for modern exploration. Unlike other lost valleys where the primary obstacles are physical, like ice or desert, the search for this hollow is fraught with cultural sensitivities. Expeditions armed with lidar technology and satellite imagery could potentially scan the dense forests of the Yawara Ranges or the remote Coromandel Peninsula, looking for the telltale geometric shapes of ancient terracing or fortifications hidden beneath the canopy. Yet to do so without the explicit invitation and guidance of the local Iwi tribe is seen by many as a profound disrespect, a continuation of the colonial impulse to claim and catalog everything, regardless of spiritual or cultural significance. The valley is more than a coordinates on a GPS. It is a part of a living cultural heritage. For some Maori, the fact that it remains lost to the outside world means it is still successfully performing its ancient role. It is being preserved exactly as the ancestors intended. This story forces us to confront a fundamental question that underpins the entire endeavor of cartography: who has the right to map a place, and for what purpose? European maps were, by their nature, tools of possession and control, designed to make the unknown known and therefore claimable. Maori oral traditions and wayfinding, in contrast, were often about relationship and responsibility, encoding knowledge within a cultural and spiritual context. The secluded hollow of New Zealand stands at the powerful intersection of these two worldviews. It is not merely a piece of lost geography. It is a powerful symbol of resistance against the idea that every square inch of the planet must be documented, owned, and exposed. Its continued secrecy, whether by natural disaster or human design, is a testament to the enduring power of indigenous knowledge and a quiet, powerful reminder that some mysteries are meant to be kept, that some places are meant to remain sacred and apart, their value measured not in their discovery, but in their continued protection for generations yet to come. Now we journey from the sacred, forest-clad secrets of New Zealand to the sun-baked, sprawling expanses of the American Southwest, a landscape defined by its stark beauty, its immense scale, and its promise of hidden riches. Here, in the domain of cowboys, prospectors, and conquistadors, we find a mystery etched not in ice or jungle, but in the very dust of legend. Our eighth vanished valley is perhaps the most iconic of the American frontier mythos, the Elusive Canyon. On the brittle, yellowing pages of 19th-century pioneer maps, drafted by surveyors and fortune seekers pushing westward, this place held a special notation. It wasn't just another geographic feature. It was described as a deep, serpentine crack in the earth, a sanctuary where life-giving water flowed year-round in a land defined by a crushing, pervasive thirst. In a region where finding a reliable water source could mean the difference between life and death for a wagon train, this canyon wasn't just a landmark, it was a potential oasis, a jewel on the map that promised survival and a chance to press further into the unknown. And then, as the maps were refined and the West was gradually tamed, this particular canyon simply vanished. Later, more accurate surveys could find no trace of it. It was as if the desert itself had decided to retract its one generous offer. Theories about its disappearance are as dry and gritty as the southwestern soil itself. The first points to the incredibly dynamic and often violent nature of desert hydrology. This is a land of dramatic extremes, where a sky of unbroken blue can transform in minutes into a raging, black thunderhead. Flash floods are a terrifyingly common occurrence. A single storm dumping rain on a distant mesa can send a wall of water, mud, and debris roaring down a dry wash with enough force to move boulders the size of houses. It is entirely plausible that the canyon described by early pioneers was fundamentally reshaped by such an event. The once clear stream could have been choked with rubble, its deep pools filled with silt, and its distinctive narrow entrance blocked by a colossal rockslide, rendering it unrecognizable from the descriptions of just a few years prior. The desert didn't bury it slowly, it might have rearranged it in a single, furious afternoon. The second, and perhaps more humbling, theory is one of simple, profound human error. Mapping the American Southwest in the 1800s was an exercise in guesswork and endurance. A surveyor, dehydrated and half-delirious from heat, staring across a shimmering mirage of heat haze, could easily misidentify a shadowed rift in a distant cliff face as the entrance to a major canyon. The cartographic process itself was incredibly fragile. A lone explorer would take rough bearings and notes in a field journal, then later try to translate those frantic scribbles onto a clean sheet of parchment in a dimly lit tent. A misread number, a mistakenly estimated distance, or a simple drafting error could place a canyon dozens of miles from its actual location. Later, when other travelers went to that exact spot on the map, they would find nothing but unbroken desert, leading them to strike the feature entirely, convinced the first report was either a lie or a hallucination. The canyon may have never been lost. It may have never been exactly where the map said it was in the first place. But it is the human stories, the legends that grew like hardy desert wildflowers in the cracks of these facts, that truly give this mystery its enduring power. The most persistent tales are those of gold prospectors, those lone wolves driven by an obsession that outmatched even their thirst. The story follows a familiar, tantalizing pattern. A grizzled old-timer, down on his luck and nearly out of water, stumbles upon the canyon by pure chance. He finds not just water, but the motherlode, a vein of gold so pure it glitters in the stream bed itself. He fills his pockets with nuggets, marks the location carefully in his mind, and struggles back to civilization, vowing to return with equipment and partners to claim his fortune. But the desert is a trickster. A sudden sandstorm erases his landmarks. A confusing maze of identical-looking mesas leads him in circles. However hard he tries, however many expeditions he mounts, he can never again find the twisting entrance to that golden canyon. He dies a broken man, his story dismissed as the ramblings of a sun-addled fool, yet another entry in the long ledger of lost mines and buried treasure that haunts the history of the West. These stories, repeated in saloons and around campfires, added a layer of irresistible mystique to the canyon's disappearance, transforming it from a mapping error into a spectral grail, a place that actively resisted discovery. Modern geologists, looking at the mystery with a cooler, scientific eye, offer a fascinating third possibility that bridges the gap between fact and folklore. They suggest the canyon might not have been a permanent feature at all, but a seasonal or ephemeral one. In hyper-arid environments, the landscape can play tricks on time. A canyon that carries a raging torrent during the brief, violent rainy season can appear, just weeks later, as a completely dry, sterile gulch, its dramatic depth the only clue to its occasional power. A pioneer party happening upon it at the tail end of a wet period might have seen a thriving stream and lush vegetation, leading them to mark it on their map as a permanent water source. A group arriving a year later during a severe drought would find only dust and stone, and would rightly conclude the earlier map was wrong. In this view, the canyon wasn't erased, it was just sleeping, its life cycle out of sync with the expectations of those who tried to pin it down on paper. Its elusiveness was a function of its nature, not its non-existence. The elusive canyon of the American Southwest, therefore, becomes more than just a lost place. It is a powerful symbol of the frontier itself, a realm of unfinished maps and unfinished stories. It represents that maddening, alluring gap between what was promised by rumor and what was delivered by reality. It embodies the spirit of an era defined by incredible opportunity, shadowed by the very real potential for complete and utter failure. It reminds us that the maps we create are not the territory itself, but merely our best, flawed interpretation of it, a snapshot in time that can be rendered obsolete by the next storm, the next drought, or the next weary traveler's mistake. The canyon's enduring mystery is a testament to the raw, untamable power of the land and the timeless human desire to believe that just beyond the next ridge, hidden in the next shadow, lies a secret waiting to be found. From the sun-bleached canyons of the American frontier, we now travel to the very heart of the Old World, to the majestic, soaring peaks of the European Alps. This is a landscape we often associate with picturesque charm, with lederhosen and yodeling and chocolate box villages, but these mountains hold a much deeper and at times darker history. They have been a crossroads for millennia, a place where empires clashed, languages mixed, and communities learned to survive in the most demanding of environments. It is here, amidst these familiar and seemingly well-trodden slopes, that we encounter a disappearance that feels particularly haunting because of its proximity to the modern world. Our ninth valley, known in old records simply as a lost dale, was once a clearly marked feature on medieval European maps. These weren't the fanciful charts of explorers guessing at unknown coasts. These were practical documents used by traders, pilgrims, and shepherds. The valley was noted for its exceptionally rich summer pastures, where cows would produce milk so rich it made famously creamy cheese, and it was also known as a linguistic island, a place where a unique dialect, a remnant of some much older language, was spoken by the isolated inhabitants. This was a real, functioning community, integrated into the regional economy and culture. And then, by the time the Renaissance was in full swing and maps were becoming more precise, this alpine dale was gone. It had been quietly, unceremoniously removed from the cartographic record. The forces that likely led to its erasure are a sobering one-two punch of natural disaster and human tragedy, a combination the Alps have known all too well. The first is the ever-present threat of the mountains themselves. The Alps are geologically young and restless, constantly being shaped by immense forces. A single, catastrophic landslide, triggered by a torrential rainstorm or a minor earthquake, could have been the valley's death sentence. Imagine an entire mountainside, saturated with water, finally letting go. It wouldn't just block a road, it could completely dam the valley's outlet stream, creating a temporary lake that would eventually burst in a devastating flood, scouring the valley floor clean. Or the slide could have directly buried the main village under countless tons of rock and earth, entombing it in a tomb of stone in a matter of minutes. The event would have been so swift and so total that to any outsider, it would simply seem as if the valley and everyone in it had vanished into thin air. The second, more insidious culprit is one that swept across all of Europe with impartial brutality: the Black Death. The plague did not discriminate between a bustling city and a remote mountain hamlet. In fact, such isolated communities were often the most vulnerable, without access to outside help or any understanding of how the disease spread. A single infected traveler could have doomed the entire population. The social structure would have collapsed overnight. Those who were not struck down by the disease would have likely fled in a desperate panic, carrying the plague with them to the next valley and sealing the fate of their old home. Within a single season, a community that had endured for centuries could have been completely wiped out, not by war or famine, but by an invisible, microscopic enemy. The pastures would have grown over, the wooden buildings would have rotted away, and the unique dialect would have died on the lips of its last speaker, leaving behind only a silent, empty basin that mapmakers, noticing its lack of contact with the outside world, would eventually assume had never been there at all. As with so many of these stories, the cold facts of geology and epidemiology were not enough for the human imagination. The sheer, inexplicable nature of the valley's complete disappearance demanded a story, and local folklore provided a chilling one: a curse. The tales that survived in neighboring villages spoke of the Dale's inhabitants bringing a terrible misfortune upon themselves. Perhaps they had offended the church, or desecrated an ancient pagan site, or broken some deep, unwritten law of the mountains. The specifics vary from telling to telling, but the outcome is always the same: divine or supernatural retribution that caused the land itself to reject them. The valley was said to be cursed, a place that was deliberately forgotten, its name struck from conversation to avoid attracting the same fate. This folklore served a dual purpose. It created a satisfying, moralistic explanation for a random tragedy, and it also acted as a powerful deterrent, keeping future generations from venturing into that area, which might have still been unstable or rife with the forgotten graves of plague victims. This folkloric warning, however, has not stopped everyone. In modern times, the Lost Dale has become a sort of grail for serious alpine hikers and amateur historians. Every so often, a story emerges from the high passes. An experienced climber far off the established trails will report finding something that doesn't belong: a single rusted iron tool, a shepherd's crook, or a wood-cutting axe, wedged in a crack in the rock at an altitude that makes no sense. Or they'll come across a strangely level plateau, an artificial-looking terrace in the wilderness that seems too perfectly shaped to be natural, suggesting the ghost of ancient fields now reclaimed by wildflowers. These finds are never conclusive. There is no signpost, no cluster of stone foundations that can be definitively linked to the lost community. They are fragments, eerie whispers that vanish as quickly as they appear, often dismissed as misidentified natural formations or the discarded gear of a much later era. But for those who find them, the experience is profound. It is the fleeting, chilling sensation of brushing up against a void, a palpable absence where a world once was. The story of the Lost Dale of the Alps is perhaps one of the most universal on our list. It is not about a far-flung corner of the globe, but about the very heart of Europe. It forces us to remember that history is not a smooth, continuous line of progress. It is a record full of holes and silences, of communities that flourished and were then utterly erased, not by grand wars, but by the mundane, brutal realities of life before modern medicine and engineering. This valley's fate prompts an unsettling question that echoes far beyond the mountains. If a whole valley with its pastures, its people, and its unique language can disappear from a well-traveled continent like Europe, leaving behind only a handful of rusty artifacts and ghost stories, then how many other such places are there? How many other worlds have been lost to time, waiting not in some distant jungle, but just beyond the next ridge, in the landscape we think we know so well, simply waiting for someone to remember them? Now we turn to a continent of immense scale and ancient mystery, to the dramatic geological scar that tears across eastern Africa, the Great Rift Valley. This is a place where the very continent is slowly, inexorably pulling itself apart, creating some of the most spectacular and volatile landscapes on the planet. It was here, in the early decades of the 20th century, at the very tail end of the age of terrestrial exploration, that a story unfolded which would come to challenge the very foundations of cartographic certainty. A team of European geologists and surveyors, armed with the best tools of their time, ventured into a particularly remote and rugged section of the rift. Their mission was to map the unknown, to fill in one of the last blank spaces on the map of Africa, and according to their subsequent, widely published reports, they succeeded in a spectacular fashion. They documented a previously unknown valley nestled within the larger rift system, a place they described as possessing a truly bizarre and almost alien geology, towering, strangely eroded rock spires, deposits of minerals that shimmered with unnatural colors, and rock formations that defied all conventional explanation. It was a discovery that promised to rewrite textbooks, but then the plot thickened. Within just a few years, other expeditions, following the precise coordinates provided by the first team, arrived in the area. They brought with them more advanced equipment and a skeptical eye, and they found nothing. Not a single one of the described geological wonders could be located. The valley, as it had been mapped and described, simply did not exist. It was a phantom. This left the scientific community with a deeply puzzling and frankly embarrassing problem. How could an entire valley, meticulously documented by trained professionals, simply vanish from the landscape? The first and most charitable theory is one of simple, profound misinterpretation. The African Rift is a geologically chaotic and visually overwhelming environment. The play of light and shadow across its deep gorges can play tricks on the mind. The explorers, perhaps suffering from heat exhaustion or a lack of reliable reference points, might have misread the landscape entirely. A particularly dramatic canyon, viewed from a specific angle at a certain time of day, could have been mistaken for an entirely separate valley system. The unusual mineral deposits might have been nothing more than a trick of the light on a wet rock face after a rare rain shower. Their entire discovery could have been a magnificent collective mirage, a classic case of seeing what they desperately wanted or expected to see in a land that defied easy categorization. A second, more dynamic theory involves the incredible geological volatility of the rift zone itself. This is one of the most tectonically active places on Earth, where the ground literally shifts under your feet. It is a realm of frequent earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and rapid erosion. Could the valley have been real, but only temporarily? Some geologists have proposed it might have been a massive seasonal wetland, a vast depression that filled with water during a period of unusually heavy rains, creating a temporary lake and altering the appearance of the rock formations around it. The first team might have seen it during this unique, fleeting wet phase. By the time the follow-up expeditions arrived, the water could have completely evaporated, the sun-baked mud flats cracking and settling into a form that looked nothing like the lush, geologically dramatic basin described in the initial reports. In this scenario, the valley wasn't a phantom, it was a chameleon, its appearance changing so drastically with the seasons that it became unrecognizable. Then there is the third and most controversial theory: deliberate cartographic fraud. The early 20th century was a time of intense national rivalry and personal ambition in the fields of exploration and geography. The pressure to make a grand discovery, to have a feature named after oneself, to achieve fame and secure funding for future trips was immense. Could a member of that first team, frustrated by a lack of significant finds, have simply invented the valley whole cloth? Perhaps they embellished a minor geological oddity into a major one, or transposed notes from a different location entirely onto a blank spot on the map, hoping no one would ever be able to check their work in such a remote area. It would have been a risky gamble, but the rewards of pulling it off, scientific acclaim, book deals, lecture tours, might have been tempting enough for a desperate or unethical individual. This theory transforms the story from a scientific mystery into a psychological thriller, a tale of ambition trumping integrity. The legacy of the Phantom Valley of the Rift is far greater than the sum of its theories. It serves as a brilliant, stark cautionary tale about the inherent limits of human observation, especially when applied to the natural world. It reminds us that even trained scientists are not immune to error, bias, or the overwhelming power of suggestion. This single, stubborn anomaly in the cartographic record forces us to confront a humbling truth: that our maps are not reality. They are merely interpretations, stories we tell about the landscape based on the best information available at the time, information that can be flawed, incomplete, or deliberately manipulated. The story beautifully illustrates how science and speculation are not always opposing forces. They are often intertwined in a delicate dance, especially in those final, unmapped corners of the globe where hard data is scarce and the imagination is free to roam. The Phantom Valley stands as a permanent question mark on the map, a monument to the fact that sometimes the most interesting thing a survey can find is not a new feature, but the glaring, undeniable proof of our own capacity to be wrong. Our journey now takes us to the vast, sun-baked heart of Australia, to the outback, a land of breathtaking emptiness, relentless sun, and a deep, ancient silence. Here, in this seemingly inhospitable expanse, the story of our 11th vanished valley is not just a tale of a lost place, but a profound lesson in the different ways we understand the world itself. For countless generations, Aboriginal communities have passed down detailed oral histories describing a specific, sheltered gulch, a place that defied the surrounding aridity. These weren't vague legends, they were precise navigational records, sung into existence through songlines that mapped the continent. They spoke of a valley where permanent waterholes or billabongs never ran dry, even in the worst droughts. These deep, cool pools were surrounded by resilient vegetation, providing a crucial refuge for both wildlife and people. Early European settlers, struggling to survive in this alien landscape, occasionally picked up hints of this secret. Their own crude, hand-drawn maps from the 1800s sometimes include a hopeful notation, a sketch of a valley with a reliable water source, often attributed to information gleaned from local Aboriginal guides. And then, as the continent was officially surveyed and mapped with modern instruments, this particular gulch simply faded from the record. It was never formally documented, leaving a disconnect between the enduring stories of the First Nations people and the hard lines of the colonial cartographic grid. The reasons for its disappearance from Western maps are a stark reflection of the cultural collision that occurred on this continent. The most likely explanation is a tragic combination of environmental change and catastrophic miscommunication. Australia's climate is defined by its extreme variability, punctuated by periods of severe, multi-year drought. It is entirely possible that a series of these punishing dry spells, worse than any in living memory, simply caused those permanent waterholes to vanish. The aquifers that fed them might have finally drained, the earth swallowing the last of the water and leaving behind only cracked, dry clay. To a European surveyor arriving years later, a valley described as lush would appear as just another barren, red dust gully, indistinguishable from 1,000 others. They would logically assume the earlier reports, based on what they saw as primitive, native stories, were simply incorrect or exaggerated, and they would strike it from the map. This highlights the second, and perhaps more significant factor: fundamental misidentification. The Aboriginal concept of place is holistic, woven into a tapestry of story, law, and spirituality. A songline describing the valley wasn't just giving directions, it was encoding a creation story, a moral lesson, and a practical guide to survival all at once. A European settler, armed with a compass and a theodolite, would have been listening for literal, physical descriptions alone. He might have been taken to a place that symbolized the valley in the songline, or to a place that was once the valley but had since changed, and he would have dutifully recorded the coordinates, completely missing the deeper, layered meaning. The map he created was a flat, two-dimensional thing, while the Aboriginal understanding was a rich, multi-dimensional world. The valley didn't vanish from the land, it vanished from the limited perception of those who failed to understand the language of the land itself. This lost gulch holds a central, sacred place in the dreamtime legends of several Aboriginal nations. In these stories, the valley isn't merely a resource, it is a living character in the creation narrative. It might be the place where our ancestral creator being, like the rainbow serpent, rested during her journey across the world, her body carving out the waterholes as she slept. It could be a site where a great battle was fought, or where a law was given to the people. Its loss, therefore, is not just the loss of a watering hole. It is the severing of a spiritual umbilical cord, the fading of a critical verse in a cultural epic that stretches back tens of thousands of years. Each time a place like this is forgotten by the wider world, a chapter of human history is closed, and a unique way of seeing and interacting with the universe is diminished. Ironically, the very force that likely erased the valley is now fueling a desperate search for it. In our current era of intensifying climate change, Australia is experiencing some of the most severe droughts in its recorded history. Rivers are running dry, and major cities have faced water shortages. This crisis has sparked a renewed, practical interest in ancient Aboriginal hydrological knowledge. Scientists, park rangers, and government officials are now actively collaborating with Aboriginal elders, not as curious anthropologists, but as partners in survival. They are studying songlines and ancient stories, not as myths, but as potential databases of forgotten geographical knowledge. They are asking a humbling question: could the stories of a permanent waterhole, passed down for millennia, actually be a precise record of a subterranean aquifer or a unique geological formation that traps water? The search for the vanished gulch has been transformed. It is no longer a romantic quest for a lost world. It has become a critical mission to rediscover ancient wisdom that might hold the key to weathering an uncertain future. This collaboration represents a slow, painful, but necessary reconciliation between two worldviews, a recognition that the oldest maps of this land were not drawn on paper, but sung into being, and that they might still hold secrets we desperately need to remember. Leaving the sun-scorched mysteries of the Australian outback behind, we now ascend into a realm of ancient kingdoms and towering, rugged peaks. The formidable Caucasus Mountains, a natural borderland between Europe and Asia. This is a landscape steeped in some of humanity's oldest myths and bloodiest conflicts, a place where geography and destiny are inextricably linked. It is here, amidst these strategic and often impassable passes, that we encounter a disappearance born not from environmental change, but from the raw, calculated necessities of human survival. Our 12th Valley emerges not from colonial maps, but from the vellum pages of ancient Georgian chronicles, texts that tell the epic story of a nation perpetually under threat from vast, encroaching empires. These historical records describe a specific, secluded valley, hidden deep within the folds of the highest mountains, that served as an ultimate refuge. When invaders, be they Persians, Mongols, or Ottomans, swept through the lowlands, the Georgian people, from royalty to commoners, would reportedly retreat into this secret stronghold. It was a natural fortress, a place where a handful of defenders could hold off an army, allowing culture, faith, and the seed of the nation to survive the storm until it was safe to emerge and reclaim their homeland. This valley was more than a hiding place. It was a sanctuary for the very soul of a people. And then, in the cartographic records of later centuries, particularly those drawn by rival powers, this vital refuge simply vanished. Theories for its erasure are deeply intertwined with the brutal geopolitics of the region. The first and most compelling reason is deliberate political secrecy. For a small kingdom like Georgia, perpetually caught between rival empires, knowledge was the ultimate currency and the most potent weapon. The location of this sanctuary valley would have been a state secret of the highest order, protected with a ferocity equal to any military defense. It is almost certain that Georgian cartographers, if they ever committed its location to paper at all, would have done so with intentional inaccuracy or encoded maps meant only for the eyes of the king and his most trusted generals. For a foreign power trying to subdue this stubborn nation, conquering the known cities was one thing, but extinguishing the last ember of resistance required finding and destroying this final redoubt. By systematically erasing the valley from any map that could be captured or copied, the Georgians weren't just hiding a place, they were actively protecting their very means of cultural and national resurrection. Its disappearance from record was a brilliant, strategic act of defensive misinformation. Of course, the immense physical power of the Caucasus themselves cannot be ignored. This is one of the most geologically unstable and avalanche-prone mountain ranges on Earth. A single, catastrophic landslide, triggered by an earthquake or a particularly heavy winter, could have permanently altered the topography, sealing the one known entrance to the valley with an insurmountable wall of rock and ice. Such an event would have physically isolated any remaining inhabitants and made the refuge permanently inaccessible, transforming it from a strategic asset into a lost world overnight. The natural violence of the landscape could have accomplished what no invading army ever could, completing the valley's disappearance not by human design, but by the indifferent hand of nature. The mythology that grew around this hidden refuge is as breathtaking as the mountains themselves. Over centuries, its story evolved from a practical haven into something far more potent. It became known in folklore as a land of immortality, a place where time stood still and the inhabitants never aged. Some legends wove it into the quest for the Golden Fleece, suggesting it was the final resting place of that mythical artifact. Others connected it to the Christian belief in an earthly paradise, a secluded garden where the faithful would be preserved until the end of days. This transformation from a military secret to a mythic paradise is a profound psychological phenomenon. The valley ceased to be just a location and became an idea, a symbol of ultimate safety, eternal peace, and national purity, a place that existed because it had to exist in the hearts of a people who had known so much hardship and loss. Tragically, the very conflicts that made the valley necessary in ancient times have continued into the modern era, making its rediscovery a near impossibility. The Caucasus region remains a geopolitical tinderbox, scarred by recent wars, disputed borders, and ongoing tensions. The areas where this valley is most likely to be located are often within restricted military zones or are the subject of such sensitive territorial claims that organizing a proper archaeological or cartographic expedition is fraught with political danger. A research team venturing into these areas could easily be mistaken for spies, and their work could be seen as a prelude to encroachment or intelligence gathering. This modern reality acts as the final, formidable lock on the mystery, ensuring the valley remains hidden, preserving its secrets and its symbolism intact. The story of the hidden valley of the Caucasus is perhaps the ultimate example of a strategic disappearance. It demonstrates how a place can be erased not by accident or natural disaster, but by a conscious, collective decision to protect it. It shows us that maps are not just records of geography, they are instruments of power, controlling what appears on a map and, more importantly, what does not, is a profound act of sovereignty. This valley stands as a powerful monument to the idea that some places are too important to be found, that their greatest value lies not in their coordinates, but in their enduring promise of sanctuary. It reminds us that in a world obsessed with mapping every last inch of the planet, the most significant secrets are not those lost to time, but those that are deliberately and successfully kept. Now we plunge into the steamy, emerald heart of Southeast Asia, a region of unimaginable biodiversity and ancient, tangled rainforests that have long guarded their secrets with a fierce, verdant jealousy. Our search for the 13th vanished valley takes us into the heart of this green labyrinth, a story written not on parchment, but in the intoxicating scent of rare spices and the silent, watchful eyes of guardian spirits. During the feverish height of the colonial era, European mapmakers, driven by a voracious appetite for wealth, began to chart these previously mysterious lands. And on a few of these maps, a particular valley was marked with a special, tantalizing symbol, a basin rumored to be a literal gold mine of botanical riches. It wasn't gold or gems that drew them, but something perhaps even more valuable at the time: rare spices. We're talking about plants that grew nowhere else on Earth, pepper varieties that could blister the tongue, cinnamon bark with a fragrance that could perfume a palace, and other exotic flora that promised to make European traders unimaginably wealthy. This valley was a legendary spice locker, a place of such immense natural wealth that it became an obsession for mercantile companies and adventurers alike. And then, as the colonial period waned and more systematic surveys were conducted, this specific promised valley was nowhere to be found. It had been wiped from the updated maps, leaving behind only the ghost of its potential. The most logical explanation for its disappearance is a tragic tale of ruthless economic exploitation colliding with an incredibly fragile ecosystem. The colonial model was one of extraction, of taking as much as possible as quickly as possible with little thought for the future. The very act of discovering such a valley would have been its death sentence. Imagine the scene. Once its location was roughly identified, teams of laborers would have been sent in to clear-cut the unique spice-bearing plants, stripping the valley bare to feed the insatiable demand back in Europe. This rampant deforestation would have had catastrophic consequences. The rich volcanic soil of such a basin, once held in place by a thick web of roots, would have been completely exposed to the torrential tropical rains. Within a few seasons, the entire valley floor could have been scoured away by massive erosion landslides, its unique microclimate shattered, and its botanical treasures literally washed down river, lost forever. The mapmakers who came later would have found only a scarred, barren gully, unrecognizable from the lush paradise described in earlier reports, and would have had no choice but to declare the initial maps erroneous. The valley was not lost, it was consumed, its lifeblood siphoned away until there was nothing left to map. Yet, the local indigenous communities who have lived in symbiotic harmony with these forests for millennia tell a profoundly different and more spiritually complex story. In their oral traditions, the valley's disappearance is not a tale of ecological destruction, but one of deliberate protection. They speak of powerful guardian spirits, entities known by various names across different cultures, perhaps a Naga in Cambodian lore or a Penengu in Indonesian belief, that are tasked with protecting the most sacred and precious places in the natural world. These are not malevolent beings, but fierce custodians. The tales say that when the outsiders, with their greed and their careless destruction, came too close to discovering the valley, the guardians acted. They didn't destroy the place, but they hid it. They used their power to shroud it in perpetual, impenetrable mists, to confuse the pathway so that they never led to the same place twice, or to cause a deep, primal fear to settle in the hearts of the exploiters, turning them back before they could do irreparable harm. In this narrative, the valley isn't gone. It is being kept safe, preserved for a time when humanity might approach it with respect rather than rapaciousness. This folklore is far more than a simple myth. It is a sophisticated ecological philosophy encoded in story, a warning that nature itself has defenses that transcend mere physical boundaries. The fascinating twist in this story is that modern science is beginning to stumble upon evidence that suggests both explanations might contain a kernel of truth. In the remote, unexplored corners of islands like Borneo, New Guinea, or Sumatra, conservationists and biologists conducting deep jungle surveys have occasionally found themselves in what they call unexpected biodiversity hotspots. These are secluded basins that match the general description of the Lost Spice Valley, places teeming with plant and animal life found nowhere else, hidden away in almost inaccessible mountain ranges. They aren't filled with commercial spice plants, but they are arcs of biological uniqueness. The discovery of such places forces a humbling reconsideration. It's entirely possible that the colonial maps were based on real, second-hand reports of these incredible places, but their specific location was garbled in translation or deliberately misdirected by local guides who sought to protect them. The valley may have been lost because it was never precisely where the colonizers thought it was, saved from destruction by its own obscurity and the cunning of those who knew its true worth. This case becomes a powerful metaphor for the central tension of our relationship with the natural world. It illustrates the direct link between the discovery of natural wealth and its potential oblivion through exploitation. The very thing that makes a place valuable, its rare resources, is what puts it in the gravest danger. The story of this lost basin is a timeless lesson in the delicate balance between our desire to take and the absolute necessity to preserve, reminding us that some of the most precious places on Earth are those that remain steadfastly and wisely off the map. Shifting our gaze from the steamy jungles of the tropics, we now travel to the cool, windswept shores of the Baltic Sea, a region with a history as deep and complex as the amber it famously produces. Here, along coastlines that have been constantly reshaped by ice, water, and wind, we find a mystery literally buried in the sand. Our 14th vanished valley emerges from the crisp pages of medieval chronicles, penned by monks and merchants who told of a specific, low-lying coastal vale that was a literal gold mine of the ancient world, but its treasure wasn't gold. It was amber. These accounts describe a valley where the legendary tears of the gods could be found in astonishing abundance, washed up on its shores or even mined from its soft cliffs after great storms. This wasn't just a pretty trinket. In an era before global trade networks, Baltic amber was a commodity of immense value, rivaling precious gems and spices, sought after by nobility from Rome to Constantinople. This valley was a keystone in a vast and ancient economic network, a place of immense importance. And then, as the medieval period gave way to the Renaissance, this amber-rich veil simply faded from all known maps, as if the sea itself had decided to reclaim its prize. The forces behind its disappearance are a masterclass in the awesome, slow-motion power of coastal geology. The Baltic region is one of the most geologically dynamic on Earth, largely due to a phenomenon known as post-glacial rebound. For thousands of years during the last ice age, a colossal sheet of ice miles thick pressed down upon the northern part of the continent, weighing it down like a person sitting on one side of a waterbed. When that ice finally melted, the land began to slowly, inexorably rise back up again. This process is still happening today, but it's not uniform. Some parts of the coastline are rising while others are sinking. This, combined with rising sea levels from melting glaciers, created a complex dance of erosion and deposition. The Amber Valley was likely caught in the crosshairs of these titanic forces. One theory suggests that rising sea levels or a shift in powerful currents led to massive sand drifts. These relentless waves of sediment, pushed by relentless Baltic winds, could have gradually, over the course of a few centuries, completely buried the entire valley, dune by enormous dune, sealing it under a sterile, shifting blanket that rendered it invisible and inaccessible. The very thing that made the valley prosperous, its accessible coastal location, may have ultimately been its undoing. The folklore that grew around this lost treasure trove is rich with the spirit of adventure and commerce, most notably tying it to the legendary Viking trades. The Vikings weren't just raiders, they were canny and far-reaching merchants, and the amber routes of the Baltic were a cornerstone of their wealth. Norse sagas and local Baltic tales speak of a secretive trading post, a place where deals were made in the shadows of dunes for sacks of the golden resin, which would then be transported along river systems all the way to the Black Sea and beyond to the wealthy markets of the Byzantine Empire. The valley's disappearance is often woven into these stories as an act of divine retribution or a clever ruse. Perhaps the gods grew angry at the greed of the traders and buried the source, or perhaps the locals themselves, seeking to control the supply and inflate the price, spread rumors that the valley had been lost to the sea to create an aura of scarcity and mystery around their valuable commodity. This folklore adds a layer of human cunning to the geological mystery, suggesting that the truth might lie in a combination of natural disaster and deliberately manufactured legend. For a very long time, that's all this story was, a compelling mix of old records and campfire tales. But then, the landscape itself began to speak. In recent decades, the very forces that likely buried the valley have begun to reveal their secrets. Increased storm activity and relentless coastal erosion, possibly accelerated by modern climate change, have been chewing away at the Baltic coastline. And with each powerful storm that scours away a layer of sand or collapses a section of peat cliff, the past is spit back out onto the modern shore. Beachcombers and archaeologists alike have been stunned by what these erosive events have uncovered. They haven't found a labeled signpost to the lost valley, but they have discovered something just as compelling: concentrated caches of artifacts that seem to point to its reality. These aren't just random pieces of pottery. They are often Viking-age silver coins, far from any known settlement, as if lost from a trader's purse. They are carefully worked pieces of amber workshop waste, suggesting a nearby production site. Most intriguingly, they are occasional sacrificial offerings, exquisitely crafted amber figurines of Norse gods or weapons ritually placed in the water. Items of such value, they would only be offered at a place of immense spiritual and commercial significance. These finds are like scattered breadcrumbs, leading not to a single point, but to a general area, a stretch of coastline that once might have looked very different, fueling intense speculation that the mysterious veil is not a myth, but a real landscape currently sleeping under the sand, waiting for the right storm to expose a glimpse of its forgotten wealth. The story of the mysterious veil of the Baltic is a powerful reminder that our coastlines are not fixed, permanent borders, but are in fact the most dynamic and changing parts of our planet. They are a palimpsest constantly being written and rewritten by the sea. This valley's fate illustrates the beautiful, brutal intersection of geology and human history, showing how a shift in sea level or a drift of sand can literally erase a chapter of our past, turning a bustling center of enterprise into a forgotten legend. But it also offers a tantalizing hope. It prompts us to look at every eroding cliff face and every storm-washed beach with new eyes, to wonder what other treasures and what other lost worlds lie just beneath our feet, not in the depths of the ocean, but hidden in the shallow waters and shifting sands of the shore, silently holding their secrets until the planet itself decides the time is right to reveal them. Leaving the wind-sculpted coasts of the Baltic behind, we now turn our attention to a mountain range that feels much closer to home for many, the ancient, rolling waves of the Appalachians. Stretching down the eastern spine of North America, these are some of the oldest mountains on the planet, worn down by time into a landscape of deep, forested hollows and mist-shrouded peaks. We often think of this region as mapped, settled, and known, a part of the world where the age of discovery has long since passed. But the story of our 15th Valley suggests that even here, in the very cradle of American expansion, profound secrets can still be lost within a stone's throw of a modern highway. This mystery begins with the earliest maps of the American frontier, drawn by surveyors like Thomas Jefferson's father, Peter Jefferson, and other pioneers pushing westward from the colonies. On a few of these fragile, ink-on-parchment documents, there exists a curious notation for a specific Appalachian hollow, a valley noted not for mineral wealth or strategic importance, but for its bizarre and unique ecosystem. The descriptions are tantalizingly vague, mentioning strangely stunted, ancient trees unlike any others in the region, a higher density of carnivorous plants like pitcher plants and sundews, and a peculiar, persistent fog that clung to the valley floor even on clear days. It was a biological island, a hidden haven that stood out even in a landscape renowned for its biodiversity. And then, as more systematic government surveys were conducted in the 19th and early 20th centuries, this particular hollow was nowhere to be found. It had been quietly, unceremoniously erased from the official record. The reasons for its disappearance are a classic American story, a tale of progress crashing headlong into the natural world. The most direct and likely culprit is the wholesale industrial logging that swept through the Appalachians during the late 1800s and early 1900s. Timber companies, armed with new technology and a hunger for profit, clear-cut millions of acres of some of the most diverse temperate forests on Earth. It is a heartbreakingly simple equation. If this unique valley was indeed home to a stand of ancient, slow-growing trees, it would have been a prime target, a concentration of valuable timber waiting to be harvested. The very thing that made it special, its unique and likely old-growth ecosystem, would have been its death warrant. The logging crews would have moved in, felled every tree, and skidded them out using steam-powered donkeys or newly laid narrow-gauge railroad tracks. The delicate, spongy soil, once protected by a dense canopy, would have been torn up by the machinery and then washed away by mountain rains, completely altering the hydrology and microclimate of the hollow. Within a few short years, a place that had taken millennia to develop would have been reduced to a muddy, eroded wasteland, utterly unrecognizable from its former self. A surveyor arriving later would see only a scarred landscape like any other recently logged area, and would have no reason to mark it as special on a map, effectively completing its erasure. Then there is the more innocent yet equally effective explanation of human error in incredibly difficult terrain. The Appalachians are a deceivingly rugged maze. From a distance, the rolling ridges look gentle, but on the ground, they present an exhausting, disorienting repetition of steep climbs and descents into nearly identical-looking hollows. Early mapmakers, using crude chains and compasses, were working under incredibly arduous conditions. It was notoriously easy to mistake one drainage for another, to misplot a stream confluence by a mere few hundred yards on a map, a mistake that would translate to being off by miles on the actual landscape. This valley's unique characteristics might have been real, but its location could have been recorded incorrectly from the very start. Later surveyors, using the flawed original map as a guide, would go to the wrong set of coordinates, find nothing unusual, and assume the initial report was an exaggeration or a mistake, leading them to strike the feature from subsequent editions. The valley may never have been lost. We may have simply been looking for it in the wrong place for the last 200 years. This is where the story transcends old maps and takes on a new, living dimension through the oral histories of the Appalachian people. In the remote communities tucked away in these mountains, stories persist of a hidden haven, a place old-timers sometimes called a salamander heaven or a lost bog. These weren't grand legends but quiet, practical pieces of knowledge. A hunter might tell his grandson about a hollow he once stumbled upon as a young man, a place where the fireflies shone a different color, or where the creek water tasted strangely of minerals, warning him to avoid it because the footing was treacherous. These anecdotes, passed down over generations around wood stoves on front porches, were not meant for outsiders. They were a way of encoding practical and ecological knowledge within a family or community, a deep, intimate map of a home place that existed separately from the official surveys drawn in distant government offices. The fact that these stories align so closely with the descriptions on those early maps is powerful evidence that the valley was, and perhaps still is, a real place. And this leads to the most exciting modern development in the mystery. In recent decades, biologists conducting intensive biodiversity surveys in the Appalachians, particularly in the federally protected wilderness areas along the Blue Ridge Parkway and in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, have begun to make a series of startling discoveries. They've found isolated, high-elevation bogs called heath balds or hanging bogs that are relics from the last ice age. They've documented coves with staggering levels of plant and animal endemism, species that exist nowhere else on the planet. Just a few years ago, a team using helicopters to access the most remote, cliff-bound gorges discovered a previously unknown species of giant salamander, a living fossil that had evaded scientific detection until the 21st century. Each of these finds acts as a data point, a proof of concept that the Appalachians still hold undocumented worlds. The Forgotten Hollow is no longer just a romantic legend. It has become a scientific hypothesis. Researchers now actively theorize that such places do still exist, perhaps not a vast valley, but a secluded, steep-sided cove or a plateau hidden by a nearly impassable ring of rhododendron hells. These places would have been too difficult for loggers to reach economically and are too remote and confusing for casual hikers to find. They would be time capsules, preserving a fragment of the pre-colonial wilderness exactly as it was described by those first awestruck surveyors. The story of this Appalachian Hollow, therefore, does more than just add another entry to our list of lost valleys. it fundamentally changes our relationship with a landscape we thought we knew. It represents the thrilling idea that the age of discovery is not over, that the ongoing revelation of North America's natural secrets is happening right now, often in our own backyards. It's a powerful testament to the resilience of nature, showing how even in the face of massive human alteration, wild places can cling on in overlooked corners. But most importantly, it serves as a poignant reminder of the impact of our activity on these wild places. The valley's potential fate, logged into oblivion, is a microcosm of the broader environmental history of the region. Its story encourages us to look closer, to understand that the familiar ridge outside our window might not be so familiar after all, that it might still be guarding a secret in its deepest fold, a hidden haven waiting for the right pair of eyes, the right combination of old stories and new technology to finally step out of the shadows and back onto the map. Now we push deeper into the world's greatest green mystery, into the vast, breathing expanse of the Amazon rainforest. This is a place that defies the very concept of being fully known, a living, shifting entity that has guarded its innermost secrets for millennia. Our search for the 16th Valley is perhaps the most ethically complex of all, a story that begins not with a lost paradise, but with a handful of fragmented and feverish accounts from 19th century explorers. These men, fueled by a cocktail of scientific curiosity, imperial ambition, and sheer avarice, ventured into the green hell and returned with incredible tales. Among the standard reports of harsh conditions and exotic wildlife, a few spoke of something far more extraordinary, a rumored valley deep in the uncharted interior that was not just uninhabited, but was home to communities that had never had contact with the outside world. These weren't descriptions of ruins, they were claims of living, breathing people existing in complete and total isolation. The accounts varied wildly. Some described a basin of incredible fertility, while others spoke of a place protected by treacherous rapids and impassable swamps. But the core detail was always the same, a people who were there, and then, according to all subsequent maps and expeditions, were not. The valley and its inhabitants had vanished from the geographical record as completely as if they had been a mirage. Unraveling this disappearance forces us to consider two powerful and opposing forces, both uniquely capable of reshaping the Amazonian landscape. The first is the incredible, dynamic power of the rainforest's hydrology. The Amazon is not a static place, it is a fluid world. Its rivers are not fixed lines on a map, but living, pulsing arteries that constantly change their course. A massive logjam, a period of unusually intense rainfall, or a sudden landslide can cause a major river to abandon its channel entirely, carving a new path through the soft soil and leaving its old bed to silt up and become dry land within a few years. This means the geography itself is in a state of perpetual flux. A valley that was once accessible via a navigable tributary could, in a single season, become completely landlocked and isolated by a shift in the river's course, its entrance hidden behind a newly formed wall of jungle. The map doesn't just become outdated, it becomes actively misleading, a snapshot of a reality that no longer exists. The valley wouldn't need to move, the world around it would simply rearrange itself, effectively sealing it off from the outside. The second and far more profound explanation is one of deliberate human choice, intentional isolation. The 19th and 20th centuries were not kind to the indigenous peoples of the Amazon. The wave of exploration that brought those first tantalizing reports was followed by waves of far more destructive forces. Rubber barons who enslaved entire populations, missionaries who sought to dismantle cultures, and diseases like measles and influenza against which isolated tribes had no immunity, often suffering mortality rates of 90% or higher. In this context, contact with the outside world was not an adventure, it was a death sentence. The oral histories of many contacted Amazonian tribes contain a common, heartbreaking thread. Stories of a time when their people were more numerous, and of a conscious decision by a segment of the group to break away and flee deeper into the forest to escape the advancing violence and sickness. The decision to isolate wouldn't have been made out of fear alone, but from a place of deep cultural and spiritual wisdom. Many indigenous accounts that reference such a place don't call it a valley, but a sacred territory, a heartland where their most essential traditions and their very autonomy could be preserved. Hiding it would be an act of supreme resilience, a strategic retreat to ensure survival. They wouldn't destroy trails, they would simply stop maintaining the ones that led outward, allowing the voracious jungle to swallow them whole in a matter of months. Their disappearance from the map wasn't an accident, it was a successful defense mechanism, a declaration of sovereignty written not on paper, but in the silent, patient growth of the forest. This brings us to the central, throbbing ethical dilemma at the heart of this mystery, and indeed of all modern exploration. For centuries, the driving impulse has been to find, to document, to claim, and to know. The blank spot on the map was a challenge to be conquered. But what if that blank spot is blank by design? What if the greatest act of respect we can offer is to honor that choice to remain unknown? The desire to find this valley, to prove the old stories true, is now weighed against the very real possibility that doing so could inadvertently bring harm. A common cold carried by a researcher could wipe out a population with no resistance, or renewed interest could attract illegal loggers or miners to the area. The romance of discovery is now shadowed by the responsibility of consequence. This has led to a dramatic shift in how such searches are conducted. Modern explorers are just as likely to be anthropologists and human rights advocates, and their most important tool is no longer the machete, but the satellite. High-resolution imagery has revealed something astonishing. Even today, in the 21st century, there are vast tracts of the Amazon, particularly in the border regions between Peru, Brazil, and Colombia, that show clear signs of human habitation, distinctive, longhouse-shaped clearings in the canopy, gardens carved out of the forest in areas that are officially designated as uninhabited. Wilderness, these are not the ruins of a lost civilization. They are the homes of living, breathing communities that are actively choosing to avoid contact. The technology that could pinpoint their location is now being used to create protected buffers around them, to enforce no-fly zones, and to respect their chosen isolation. The valley may not be lost at all. We may know exactly where it is, and we are making the conscious, collective decision to turn around, to leave the final blank spots on the map untouched, not because we can't fill them in, but because we finally understand that some secrets are not meant for us to own. This case stands as the ultimate testament to the idea that the greatest mystery isn't always about finding what was lost, but about having the wisdom to protect what has deliberately hidden itself, to understand that in a hyper-connected world, the right to remain disconnected may be the most precious freedom of all. From the immense living labyrinth of the Amazon, we now journey to an island where the planet's fiery heart beats closest to the surface, Iceland. This is a land forged in the violent meeting of ice and fire, a place where the ground itself steams and the landscape can be utterly transformed between breakfast and dinner. It is here, amidst this breathtaking geological drama, that we find a story of disappearance written not in slow erosion or human secrecy, but in the sudden, apocalyptic violence of a volcanic tantrum. Our 17th Valley, known in the ancient Norse sagas as a hidden glen of immense restorative power, emerges from the same rich oral tradition that gave us tales of Eric the Red and Leif Erikson. These epic poems, passed down by skalds before finally being written on calfskin, don't just speak of a valley, they sing of a sanctuary. They describe a secluded basin, veiled by mist and surrounded by protective cliffs, where geothermal forces created a natural paradise of bubbling hot springs and warm, steam-heated pools. This wasn't just a scenic spot. It was revered as a place of profound healing where warriors could soak away the pains of battle and the sick could seek rejuvenation from the earth itself. It was a sacred spa, a gift from the gods in an otherwise harsh and demanding land. And then the songs fell silent. The valley ceased to be mentioned, its location fading from memory and later maps, as if the gods had simply withdrawn their favor and reclaimed their gift. The agent of this erasure is the very same force that created Iceland in the first place. Its utterly volatile and unforgiving geology. Iceland is a newborn in geological terms, perched precariously atop the mid-Atlantic ridge, where the North American and Eurasian tectonic plates are slowly, relentlessly tearing apart from each other. This creates a landscape that is less like solid ground and more like the thin, fragile skin on a pot of boiling soup. Volcanic eruptions are not rare events here. They are a fundamental part of the island's identity. The fate of our lost healing Glen was likely sealed by one such cataclysmic event. We can imagine the sequence, supported by modern volcanology, a period of ominous earthquakes shaking the region, a new fissure tearing open along a fault line with a sound like the earth screaming, and then a hellish eruption of fire, ash, and molten rock. A lava flow of immense volume and temperature wouldn't just gently cover the valley. It would actively seek it out, pouring into the low-lying basin like water into a bathtub, filling it to the brim, and then solidifying into a vast, black, impenetrable sheet of solid rock. In a matter of days or even hours, every hot spring would be choked, every green patch incinerated, and every topographical feature that defined the valley would be buried under dozens of feet of new, sterile land. The map wasn't just redrawn. The very parchment it was drawn on was set on fire and replaced with a blank, smoking slate. This incredible power of the land to rewrite itself in an instant is not just ancient history, it is a constant, living reality for every Icelander. In our own lifetime, we've witnessed this process unfold with breathtaking speed. The 1973 eruption on the island of Himalayas threatened to completely destroy a harbor town, with lava flows swallowing houses whole. The 2010 eruption of Eyjafjallajökull grounded air traffic across Europe, a stark reminder of Iceland's ability to disrupt the modern world. And most recently, the 2021 and subsequent eruptions in the Geldingadalur Valley and around Grindavik have been a spectacular, real-time lesson in land building, with new volcanic cones and lava fields forming right before our eyes on live streams. This is the essential context for our lost valley. Its disappearance isn't a mysterious anomaly. It is the expected outcome of living on this particular piece of planetary real estate. The stories of its loss are a testament to the Icelandic spirit, a profound acceptance of nature's supreme power, woven into the very fabric of their culture and history. Yet the earth that gives also takes away, and sometimes it offers a fleeting glimpse of what it has taken. The same geothermal fury that buried the healing Glen is now, centuries later, starting to hint at its possible location. As new volcanic activity stresses the crust, creating fresh fissures and reactivating old fault lines, the ground in certain remote regions is literally cracking open. Geologists and intrepid hikers have reported discovering brand new steam vents and hot springs in areas previously considered geothermally dormant. These aren't the established, tourist-friendly spots like the Blue Lagoon. These are raw, new wounds in the earth, hissing plumes of steam and boiling water into the frigid Arctic air. For those who study the old sagas and maps, these discoveries are electrifying. Could one of these new fissures be a reopening of the very same geothermal system that once fed the legendary healing pools? Is the land, in its constant state of flux, beginning to uncover the lid it once placed over its own secret? It's a tantalizing possibility that blends cutting-edge science with ancient poetry, suggesting that the valley might not be gone forever, but merely sleeping, waiting for the next convulsion of the earth to bring it back to the surface. The story of the elusive Glen of Iceland is ultimately a profound meditation on the nature of history itself. In most parts of the world, history is something buried underground, something we must dig for with trowels and brushes. But in Iceland, history is not just underground, it is the ground. The landscape is not a passive backdrop to human events. It is the primary actor, an unpredictable and often ruthless character in the saga. This valley's fate forces us to expand our understanding of what it means for a place to be lost. It wasn't lost to forgetfulness or error. It was quite literally consumed and remade by the living planet. It invites us to see the world not as a fixed stage, but as a dynamic, breathing entity that is still under construction, capable of editing its own story without consulting its human inhabitants. The Lost Glen reminds us that our maps are not just incomplete. They are temporary, fragile documents in a book whose pages are constantly being burned and rewritten by the undeniable, elemental power of the earth itself. Now we venture onto the very backbone of ancient globalization, onto the dusty, windswept tracks of the Silk Road. This wasn't a single path, but a sprawling web of trade routes connecting the empires of the East and West, a conduit for silk, spices, ideas, and diseases that shaped the course of human history. And it is here, in the immense, arid heart of Central Asia, that we encounter a mystery that cuts to the very core of how we understand the past. Our 18th vanished valley isn't just a lost place. It is a ghost in the machine of history, a place known as the Phantom Dale. On maps used by merchants and guides for centuries, this valley was marked as a crucial waypoint, a place where the iconic caravanserais, those fortified inns that offered shelter, supplies, and security to wearied travelers and their camels, were said to be particularly grand and welcoming. It was a beacon of civilization in a terrifyingly empty landscape, a name whispered with relief by those traversing the treacherous stretches between known oases. And then, as the age of maritime trade rose and the Silk Road's overland dominance waned, this specific dale began to fade. Its description grew fainter with each new map. Its location became less certain, until it finally vanished from the cartographic record entirely, leaving behind only a question: was it ever really there at all? The forces suspected of erasing it are the twin horsemen of Central Asian history: relentless environmental change and devastating political chaos. The first is the slow, suffocating advance of desertification. The same process that buried the Saharan oasis likely played out here. The valley's existence would have depended on a delicate and fragile water source, perhaps an underground aquifer fed by distant mountain snowmelt, or a seasonal river that flowed through the basin. As the climate shifted over centuries, becoming drier and more unpredictable, that lifeblood would have dwindled. The water table would have dropped, the river would have become a ghost of its former self, and then finally, a dusty trench in the earth. Without water, the caravanserais would have been abandoned. The gardens that supplied them would have withered, and then the desert sands, driven by the relentless steppe winds, would have begun their patient, final work, burying the mud brick walls and the memories of the place under a featureless, rolling sea of dunes, erasing all visible trace of the valley's former prosperity. But the environment rarely works alone in this part of the world. It is often aided by human conflict. Central Asia is a crossroads, and for millennia, it has been a highway for conquerors. The rise and fall of empires here was not a gentle process. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century, in particular, were a cataclysm that reshaped the region's destiny. Their strategy was often one of total war, and a key part of that strategy was the deliberate destruction of infrastructure. A thriving caravanserai in a strategic valley wasn't just an inn. It was a node of economic and military intelligence, a place that could offer succor to an enemy. It is entirely plausible that a Mongol army, or that of another conquering power, systematically razed the valley's structures, smashed its irrigation systems, and dispersed or slaughtered its population to deny their use to rivals and to break the spirit of the region. The political upheaval wouldn't just destroy the place, it would shatter the very trade networks that made its existence necessary, ensuring that even if the water still flowed, there would be no one left to travel there, and no reason for anyone to remember it was ever there. Its disappearance was both a cause and an effect of the silencing of the great trade routes. This has led to a fascinating and ongoing debate that strikes at the heart of historical methodology. On one side are the historians who argue the Phantom Dale was a real, singular location, a specific valley that was a vital stop on a specific branch of the Silk Road before it was lost to the sand. They point to the consistency of its description across multiple, independent sources over a long period. On the other side is a more intriguing theory that the Phantom Dale was never one place at all. Instead, it might be what scholars call a composite myth. The Silk Road was unimaginably long and arduous. A merchant traveling from Damascus to Xi'an would pass through dozens of caravanserais. Over years of travel, the memory of these stops could easily blur in a traveler's mind. The most welcoming inn, the most reliable water source, the most beautiful valley view, these individual, positive experiences from different locations could have been unconsciously combined into a single, idealized, perfect stop. Storytellers along the route would then amplify this ideal, and mapmakers, hearing these consistent stories, would feel compelled to include this legendary, best of all possible valleys on their charts, giving a mythical place a seemingly factual location. In this view, the valley is a collective dream, a geographical utopia born from the desperate need for comfort on a dangerous journey. For a very long time, this debate was purely academic, a war of interpretations waged over ancient texts. But the deserts of Central Asia have begun to yield new evidence that is tilting the scales. In recent decades, archaeological teams, often using satellite imagery to pinpoint promising sites, have begun excavating in the former heartland of the Silk Road. In Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan, they are uncovering the ruins of numerous previously unknown caravanserais and small settlements. They aren't finding a single, spectacular Phantom Dale, but they are finding a pattern. They are discovering that the Silk Road was far more densely populated with way stations than previously believed. These finds are often not in the locations predicted by the old maps, but they consistently match the general description of a sheltered stop with water access. This suggests a powerful third possibility, that the Phantom Dale did exist but not as a single point. It existed as a type of place, a repeating feature of the Silk Road landscape. The legend on the map wasn't pointing to one valley, but to the idea of the valley, a promise that somewhere ahead, you would find the shelter and water you needed to survive. The valley's true nature was its reproducibility. It was a franchise of safety in an unsafe world. This revelation forces a complete re-evaluation of how we view historical commerce. We often imagine the Silk Road as a clearly defined line on a map, but it was more like a shifting, living delta of pathways, constantly adapting to local conditions, political agreements, and environmental changes. A valley that was a major hub one century could be completely bypassed the next due to a new tax or a local war, its importance fading into obscurity. The story of the Phantom Dale embodies this fluidity. It shows us that the geography of trade was not fixed, but was a consensus reality, built on the stories of merchants and the best guesses of mapmakers. It encourages us to think less about pinning down exact locations and more about understanding the networks, the rhythms, and the very human needs that created these routes in the first place. The valley's greatest lesson is that the most important footprints left by history are not always physical. Sometimes they are the enduring impressions of hope, rumor, and the universal need for a safe place to rest on a long and difficult journey. Leaving the sprawling, mythic trade routes of Central Asia behind, we now travel to an island nation where ancient tradition and dramatic nature are inextricably intertwined. Our journey brings us to the rugged, deeply beautiful spine of Japan, the Japanese Alps, a place of soaring granite peaks, deep beech forests, and a cultural history that feels as layered as the rock itself. It is here, in the heart of a nation known for its meticulous records, that we find a mystery of deliberate forgetting. Our 19th vanished valley emerges not from the maps of foreign explorers, but from the precise and often poetic records of feudal Japan. These documents, penned by administrators and traveling monks, make passing reference to a remote valley, so isolated that it developed customs, dialects, and even spiritual practices found nowhere else in the country. It was a world apart, a cultural petri dish sealed off by geography, where time seemed to flow at a different, slower pace. And then, in the tumultuous transition from the feudal Edo period to the modernizing Meiji era, this distinct community and the valley that cradled it were systematically scrubbed from all official records, as if the nation itself had decided to turn the page and forget a paragraph it found inconvenient or embarrassing. The mechanisms of its disappearance are a fascinating blend of the violent and the bureaucratic. The Japanese Alps are a breathtakingly young and dramatic mountain range, part of the volatile Pacific Ring of Fire. This is a landscape perpetually under construction, where torrential typhoon rains, earthquakes, and the inevitable force of gravity conspire to reshape the land in sudden, catastrophic events. A single, massive landslide triggered by a tremor or a period of unprecedented rainfall could have been the valley's physical death sentence. Such an event could have dammed the river that carved the valley, creating a lake that drowned the settlements, or it could have sent a wall of mud and rock thundering down to bury the entire community in a tomb of earth, instantly severing its connection to the outside world and erasing its footprint from the landscape in one violent act of geological censorship. Yet there is a second, more subtle and perhaps more complete form of erasure at play: profound societal change. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 was a revolution aimed at dragging Japan into the modern world. It was a period of intense centralization where the power of regional lords was broken and the authority of the emperor in Tokyo was made absolute. In this new, unified Japan, there was little tolerance for outliers, for communities that clung to old, idiosyncratic ways. A valley that spoke a strange dialect, practiced unapproved religious rites, or simply refused to integrate into the new national system would have been seen as a problem. Its disappearance from maps and records may not have been an accident, but a deliberate act of administrative cleansing. Officials may have forcibly relocated the remaining inhabitants, dispersing them to break their cultural cohesion. The valley's name would have been struck from registries, its lands absorbed into a larger administrative district, and its very existence relegated to the status of an inconvenient rumor, a fragment of the old Japan that the new Japan was eager to leave behind. This interplay between harsh nature and rigid social order is precisely what fuels the powerful folklore that now surrounds the Lost Valley. In the absence of facts, stories bloomed, offering two compelling, contrasting narratives for its fate. The first paints it as a place of exile, a remote dumping ground for those who fell out of favor with the powerful disgraced samurai, political dissidents, or criminals sentenced to a life of isolation. In this version, the valley's disappearance is a tragic end to a community founded on shame, a place that was always meant to be forgotten. The second, more spiritual narrative, heavily influenced by Shinto and Buddhist beliefs, reimagines the valley as a place of enlightenment. It becomes a legendary satori, a hidden sanctuary where monks or hermits could achieve spiritual awakening, cut off from the distractions of the mundane world. In this telling, the valley didn't vanish, it transcended. It became a liminal space, a bridge between our world and another, accessible only to those with pure intentions, its physical form dissolving into a state of spiritual perfection, forever just beyond the reach of ordinary perception. This rich tapestry of legend finds a strange and eerie echo in the reports of modern-day hikers who venture into the most remote sections of the northern Alps. Many return with stories that defy easy explanation. They speak of encountering an unnerving, profound silence in certain high basins, a deadness in the air where even the insects seem hesitant to buzz and the birds refuse to sing, a quiet so complete it feels heavy and intentional. Others report finding enigmatic markers that hint at a human past but offer no clarity. A single, moss-covered Jizo statue guarding a trail that leads nowhere, a carefully stacked cairn of stones in a place that makes no logical sense for a trail marker, or the faint, almost invisible remnants of what might have been ancient terracing on a hillside too steep for any known form of agriculture. These experiences are not evidence, but they are powerful sensations. They are the moments where the modern, mapped world seems to grow thin, where the weight of the past and the power of suggestion press in, making the legend feel palpably, hauntingly real for those who walk through the landscape that birthed it. Ultimately, the story of this lost Japanese valley is about more than just a missing place on a map. It serves as a profound cultural capsule, a frozen moment of a Japan that no longer exists. Its unique traditions, if they could be recovered, would offer an invaluable, unfiltered window into the incredible diversity of regional life that was sacrificed on the altar of national unity and modernization. The valley's persistence in folklore is a form of cultural memory, a stubborn refusal to let every part of the past be streamlined into a single, official narrative. It prompts a deeply reflective question about the price of progress and the value of isolation. In our frantic, hyper-connected world, the idea of a place so remote it developed its own reality is incredibly powerful. It forces us to consider what we lose when every corner of the globe is mapped, monitored, and integrated, and it invites us to wonder if the greatest treasures aren't gold or jewels, but the forgotten stories and unique ways of life that once flourished in the world's hidden folds, waiting in the silent valleys for someone to remember them. And so we arrive at our final destination, number 20 on our journey, a mystery that takes us back to the very dawn of civilization itself, the sun-scorched, river-carved lands of ancient Mesopotamia, the fertile crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates where cities, writing, and law first took root. It is here, amidst the dust of empires long crumbled, that we find a clue to a disappearance so complete it challenges our understanding of these foundational cultures. Scattered through the world's oldest surviving text, Sumerian tablets, Akkadian merchant records, Babylonian administrative documents, are fleeting, almost ghostly references to a significant canyon, a deep cut in the earth that was far more than a geographical feature. These texts don't speak of a barren gorge, but of a fertile corridor, a place where the soil was exceptionally rich and water was somehow more abundant, a verdant anomaly in a landscape that was already precariously dependent on the two great rivers. This canyon was described as a breadbasket, a place that supported satellite communities and may have even been a crucial agricultural backup for the world's first great urban centers. And then the references simply stop. Within a few generations of cuneiform script, this vital place is never mentioned again. It was wiped from the historical record as thoroughly as if it had been written on a clay tablet and then left out in the rain, its memory melting back into the mud from which it came. To understand how such a vital place could vanish, we must first appreciate the breathtaking ingenuity and the profound vulnerability of the world's first hydraulic engineers. The Mesopotamians didn't just depend on their rivers, they mastered them, building complex networks of canals, dikes, and reservoirs to irrigate their fields and control seasonal floods. This canyon's fertility almost certainly depended on a similarly sophisticated and likely delicate irrigation system, one that tapped into the water table or diverted a seasonal stream. The first theory for its disappearance points directly to the catastrophic failure of this very human technology. A shift in the course of a major river, perhaps triggered by a distant earthquake or a particularly massive flood, could have starved the entire canal network of its water source. Or, more subtly, the system could have fallen victim to its own success. Without understanding the concepts of salinization or water table depletion, these early farmers might have inadvertently poisoned their own land. Intensive, constant irrigation in a hot, dry climate can cause water to evaporate, leaving behind toxic concentrations of salt in the soil that eventually kill all plant life. The canyon's fields, once so productive, could have slowly turned white and barren, a victim of an ecological disaster they couldn't even comprehend, leading the population to simply abandon it to the desert. But the Earth itself holds a far more violent and immediate power in this seismically active region. The second theory posits a sudden, apocalyptic geological event. The Middle East is crisscrossed with major fault lines. A powerful earthquake could have triggered a massive landslide, completely blocking the canyon's entrance or outlet, and either damming its water source to create a stagnant marsh or diverting it entirely, leaving the fields to wither and die. In a single, terrifying afternoon of shaking ground and falling rock, a thriving agricultural center could have been rendered uninhabitable, its population forced to flee, and its location becoming a place of bad memories and tragedy, its name eventually fading from all official records as the generations passed and the rubble was buried by dust. The enduring power of this lost canyon, however, lies not just in its physical fate, but in its potential to be a missing piece in our largest puzzles. Its description, a fertile, water-rich canyon in Mesopotamia, has inevitably led some historians and archaeologists to draw a tantalizing, though highly speculative, connection to the most famous lost garden of all, the biblical Eden. The Book of Genesis describes a river watering the garden that then parted into 4 headwaters, 2 of which are named as the Tigris and Euphrates. For centuries, scholars have tried to pinpoint this location, and a lost, exceptionally fertile canyon that once existed somewhere between these 2 rivers is a compelling candidate for the inspiration behind such a powerful origin story. Whether it was the literal Eden is beside the point. The theory suggests that the memory of this once great and then lost agricultural paradise could have persisted in oral tradition for centuries, eventually being woven into the foundational myths of the region, transforming a real-world geological and human tragedy into a story about the loss of innocence and harmony with nature. For most of modern history, this is where the story would have ended, a compelling theory based on crumbling tablets and unverifiable speculation, but we are no longer limited to shovels and guesses. The field of satellite archaeology has revolutionized the search for such places. Using advanced radar and infrared imaging from space, scientists can now peer beneath the surface of the modern desert, detecting subtle variations in soil moisture and density that reveal the ghostly footprints of ancient human activity. And in the vast deserts of Iraq and Syria, these satellites have indeed begun to find something extraordinary. They have identified what appear to be the subsurface remains of extensive, long-vanished canal systems, far more complex than previously imagined, stretching out from the known rivers like veins from an artery. More intriguingly, they have pinpointed the locations of what seem to be buried river channels, old courses of the Tigris or Euphrates that were abandoned millennia ago. And along the banks of these phantom rivers, the satellites have detected the telltale geometric shapes of buried settlements and field boundaries, the potential bones of a lost civilization. One of these ghostly river valleys, now completely invisible from the ground, could very well be our vanished canyon, its fertile lands currently lying under meters of sand, preserved in the dry desert air, waiting for the day when politics and peace allow archaeologists to finally uncover the truth. The story of the vanished canyon of the Middle East is a profound and sobering full-circle moment for our entire journey. It brings us back to the very beginning of recorded history, only to show us that the act of recording is itself fragile. It connects the incredible ingenuity of our earliest ancestors with the consequences of their ambition, demonstrating that the struggle to manage our environment is not a modern problem, but the oldest human story of all. This lost canyon stands as a silent testament to the fact that civilization has always been a precarious experiment, a constant negotiation between human will and the unpredictable whims of the planet. Its potential rediscovery, not by a lone explorer with a map, but by a scientist analyzing data from an orbiting eye in the sky, offers a thrilling glimpse into the future of exploration. It leaves us with one final, humbling thought to ponder as our journey ends. If a place so central to the story of human beginnings can be lost for thousands of years, what other ancient wonders, what other chapters of our own story are still waiting beneath the sands, just out of sight, awaiting their moment to return to the light? From the cloud-shrouded peaks of the Himalayas to the impenetrable green heart of the Amazon, our journey through these 20 vanished landscapes reveals something far deeper than a simple catalogue of geographical errors. It uncovers a profound tapestry woven from threads of human fallibility, unimaginable natural forces, and deliberate, often brilliant, acts of secrecy. Each story, unique in its details, echoes a universal truth. Our world remains stubbornly, wonderfully unknowable in its entirety. We have charted the coastlines and mapped the continents, yet these silent, empty spaces on old parchment remind us that the planet still holds its secrets close, guarding them with a mix of tectonic indifference and human cunning. These tales collectively teach us a humbling lesson about the fragility of our own records. We build libraries and servers to store our knowledge, believing we have captured the world in a net of data. But a single avalanche, a shift in the desert sands, or a decision by a community to retreat from the world can erase a chapter of history as thoroughly as a fire in an archive. Our maps are not reality. They are merely our best, most current interpretation of it, a snapshot that can be rendered obsolete by the very next storm, the very next landslide, or the very next act of defiance. They are a testament to our desire to impose order on chaos, but the chaos always has the final say. Yet, within that fragility lies an incredible power, the transformative power of myth. When a valley vanishes from the tangible world, it doesn't simply cease to exist. it often undergoes a second birth in the realm of story. The lost agricultural basin of Mesopotamia becomes the inspiration for the Garden of Eden. The hidden sanctuary in the Caucasus transforms into a land of immortality. The secluded refuge of the Japanese Alps is reimagined as a place of spiritual enlightenment. This is not a failure of memory, but a triumph of the human spirit. We are compelled to fill voids with meaning, to weave tragedy into legend, and to ensure that a place never truly dies as long as its story is told. These myths become their own form of preservation, often carrying within them a kernel of ecological or cultural truth that cold, hard facts could never convey. This endless quest for discovery, this burning curiosity to find what is lost, is what ultimately defines our relationship with these places. It is a quest that is now being revolutionized by technology. Satellite radar peers through dense jungle canopies, lidar scans reveal ghostly structures beneath the earth, and infrared imaging uncovers buried river channels in deserts. Yet, in a beautiful paradox, these tools of ultimate revelation are also teaching us the value of restraint. In the Amazon, the ability to locate isolated tribes comes with the profound ethical responsibility to leave them be. The technology that could fill in every blank spot now also allows us to draw protective circles around them, to honor the choice to remain unknown. The quest is no longer just about finding, it is about understanding when to stop looking. So, as we reflect on these 20 enigmas, let them inspire not just wonder, but also a healthy caution about the limits of our own understanding. They remind us that certainty is an illusion, and that the most captivating stories are often found in the gaps between what we know and what we can only imagine. Perhaps one day, a melting glacier in Greenland will reveal the full extent of that Norse farmer's field, or a storm in the Baltic will finally expose the Amber Valley's secrets. But until then, their mysteries endure, challenging us to stay curious, to respect the unknown, and to always remember that the map is not the territory. It is a guide, a story, and an invitation, but it is never, ever